to the City Council work session, July 23rd, last Monday night work session and council meeting for several weeks. So we have a full list. I know that Mike has something to discuss. I was going to leave it open for Betty to jump in first. Our first item is committee reports and items of interest. Does anyone else have anything that they need to bring to the table at this time? Emily, I'm going to let you go first, if that's okay with you.
I'll be quick. I still really need better minutes faster. Thanks.
Okay, well, that was quick. That was quick. Okay, you know, since Betty's not here, I'm going to let you take it away. Oh, but well, okay, take it away.
I know she has an item.
I know she has an item too, and I don't want her to lose it, but I also don't want to lose time waiting. So
I believe this can go quickly. It has the potential to.
Okay.
And I'll speak to it if I get a second. I move to direct the city manager to prepare for the city council meeting on Wednesday a resolution sending to the voters the following question. Shall eWeb sell and shall the city of Eugene buy the eWeb administration building for rehabilitation and use as a city hall? In accordance with EC 2.999 sub 2, the resolution shall include for council approval the ballot title for the advisory measure.
Second.
Okay, speak to it.
Thank you. I have an idea about how we might solve two rather large problems in our community at once with money we have in the bank. And it will require a more thorough conversation than we have time for tonight or Wednesday. And we should have it with the community. But at its base, it begins with this question about our city hall location and how we're going to pay for it. What may come of the building of a city hall on the butterfly lot requires a further conversation about how we would pay for it. This is an opportunity to do so with, the possibility exists to do so with Riverfront Urban Renewal District money. And it is something that I believe allows us to address a couple of other problems. But this question tonight that I've put on before us is simply, can we ask the manager to come back to us with that resolution on Wednesday for us to discuss further betwixt now and then, and certainly in the meeting on Wednesday. And for me, what drives putting this before the voters, and there's some issues around that. I know some colleagues have issues with this. The question for me is this: how can we move forward effectively on a city hall when we've never had more than 5 votes for any particular direction? It seems to me that through the 12 years I've been talking about this issue, we've had 3 councilors that favor one idea and 3 councilors that favor another idea and 2 that favor something else, and the most we've ever gotten to as a majority is 5. And the deficiency, it seems to me, has been a vision for how we move forward and how we proceed. And this, I believe, is a possible answer, which is to allow the public to advise us what they think. It is simply advisory and carries no force of law, but with it we might gauge what the general public believes and be better served for how to make good decisions on this. And as I mentioned, come up with another option. So this is simply a question of, shall the manager come back on Wednesday with the appropriate resolution, and we can talk about it some more.
So are there folks who want to speak to this? Others? Comments? Feedback? Greg?
I think that this could be a way to help us get off the dime with City Hall, one way or another. Get some input from the voters in the community, and really kind of look at. I don't think that we really had time enough. The last time we went through the different options that we had for City Hall, that we really didn't have time to fully vet the options that were before us, including eWeb. And it could be coming back to us in a different format or a different way, depending on what the manager does with this, if we decide to pass this tonight or not. So I'm in favor of getting a few more eyeballs on this,
Emily?
opinions.
I just hesitate because I'd like to know what happens with the land swap. And I wonder if people would make the decision if they had all of the possible realities at the table rather than deciding this without that information. At the moment, I want to stay downtown, but I'm always open to letting people say what they want to say.
Chris?
I think there's a number of questions that you want to have the public give you advice on, and I think those questions are usually pretty straightforward. They're relatively simple. Bond measures, serial levies, generally those are the kinds of things. I mean, if you're going to use tax dollars and you're going to ask for more, you absolutely need to have the public do it. In this case, after having talked about this for 20 years, served on 2 committees, received reports that are this thick, I don't think this is an issue that can be taken to the voters and say, just vote on this. There's an enormous amount of very detailed and complicated information that the public doesn't have in order to appropriately and effectively evaluate this question. I think part of the reason that it was the city council's to deal with is, one, we weren't going to go and ask the public for money on it. We promised for 20 years that we were going to figure out a way to finance this ourselves. And 2, we were elected to study the issues in sufficient detail to understand all of the implications and all of the complications and all of the elements, and I think we should continue to do that. This council, whether it's 5-4 or 7-1 or unanimous, has the time and the mandate to study this issue thoroughly and understand what's at stake and what's going on before this decision gets made. And I think in this particular instance, it's a level of complexity and a level of knowledge that says to me, when you're all done, you have the public basically giving you a popularity contest. Well, do you like the way this building looks, or do you like the way that vacant lot looks? And that's not what this decision is about. It's not which building looks nicer or which vacant lot looks emptier. It's a matter of what's going to be the best steps forward for the next 100 years. And I know some of us think it should be this, and some of us should think it should be that, and I think that conversation should still occur within this body, where we are taking the time and the energy to study this issue thoroughly and not just throw it out and say, you don't know a whole lot about this, but I want your vote on it. And as Mike says, it's an advisory vote. But I don't want to ask the public their opinion on something just to have to turn around and say, well, you didn't really know all the information, so I'm going to ignore what you have to say. That's a terrible way to do things. But if the public is not fully informed, then how can they effectively give you good advice? It'd be like going to a committee of the council and say, I'm not going to give you the report, but I want you to give me your input on this decision. And I know that for some, oh no, this is a very simple decision. I don't think this is simple in any way, shape, or form. We already know how complicated this is, and I don't think that level of complexity can be effectively conveyed in an election cycle.
Claire?
Thank you. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that Councilor Clark has brought to bringing this idea forward, but I essentially agree with what Councilor Pryor just said. So I can't support the resolution because I believe there are and were too many variables that went into the decisions that we made on this topic. And I think an advisory vote would end up being more of a beauty contest than a way to get a clear idea on what voters think about where City Hall should be built. We have struggled as a council to have consensus on this question, and it was a challenging decision to know what the right course or the best course of action is. I think when we took our vote, we were acting in our best judgment as a council. However, each individual councilor voted. And right now, I think we should stay the course on the butterfly lot at this point. And if we aren't successful in getting a clear title ruling, then I might think it was appropriate to reconsider our prior actions. But I still would not be supportive of this advisory vote idea.
Thank you. Alan, we are talking about a motion that that Mike has put on the table, do you need a minute, or are you interested in being in the queue? Betty, do you have anything? Okay. So,
Go ahead, Betty.
Thank you. Some people think that the eWeb building is free and that it would save money. That isn't the only thing we want, is to save money. Of course, I thought we should save the building we had. We didn't do that. It's too late for that. And we have, after thinking about it and hearing lots of arguments, we've decided on, number one, the butterfly lot. And if we can't do that, go back to our lot that we own. And I think we should stick to that. I don't think we should ask people, would you like to move to the eWeb building? It is not ours. Some people seem to think we own it. They say, why don't you use it? We don't own it, and it is not downtown. And while we are trying to get people to populate downtown, we should be staying as near the center of downtown as we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Betty just said. And if I recall correctly, the eWeb building not only isn't free, it was actually by far the most expensive of all the options that were on the table to us, by tens of millions of dollars, actually, and would probably suck up all of the capital improvements budget for the next decade or so in terms of fixing up the property to make it useful for the city. So that was one of the primary concerns. Also, its location and staying downtown, and you know, we made a choice to look at the butterfly lot. That wasn't my first choice, but then the backup plan, Plan B, is to go back to this old City Hall site and go back there and finish off what we started with the City Hall construction project. So I agree with my fellow councilors that think we should stay the course, and so I won't support the motion either.
I'm going to let Mike speak one more time, and I just want to add that I agree with what's been said in terms of the council has gone through a long deliberation. This is a complicated process. I think if the council wants to go through a process of looking at eWeb again, they should do that in a very deliberative and thoughtful way, and that this process, I think, is expediting that way too fast. So I think now that it's on the table, there's an opportunity for council to consider if they want to. If the land swap doesn't go through, then we have that option. But I will concur that I think it's pushing the point a little too fast. So for such a big decision. But Mike, did you want to speak one more time?
Yeah, I do. I think, and I appreciate the point, and I believe too that it is a large decision, not at all to be made quickly. But we have a timing issue with regard to the ballot in November if we wanted to take the option of hearing from the public on the idea. And I have a different opinion than my friends with regard to how much information the public has. I believe after the number of years in subcommittees and reports and reporting that I believe our community is reasonably well informed about this. And I have to push back on my friend Alan's point about the expense. That canard is no more true now than it was then when it was brought up originally, that it was more expensive. It was by far the least expensive option, and I didn't want to have a debate on those topics today. I didn't want to have a debate on the idea of mine that if we were to purchase this with Riverfront Urban Renewal District money, the $23 million we have in the facilities reserve, and I use that number advisedly, it's not that much, but when you add the Comcast money, that's the unallocated money we might use for a city hall. That money becomes available to do other things with. That money becomes available to perhaps build a public homeless shelter, amongst other options. And it was my opinion that we might kill two very large birds with one stone with this idea. And to do so might be something the public would encourage us to consider. But with all of that, again, I only bring this up I hope we can still have those discussions, because I think those ideas are compatible. And I have a good deal of extra new information that perhaps some of my colleagues don't. But I, again, brought this up today because if we wanted the public's input, or if we wanted to allow them their say, we have a deadline for the November ballot. And it's something that we would need to do by Wednesday. So that's why I asked this.
Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you. So if we discuss this on Wednesday, does it have to be this question? I mean, is there room to perhaps change it a little?
I am very open, if that's a question of me, I'm very open to what we might change it to, absolutely, but that's going to be within the purview of the city attorney with regard to the language of the resolution and whether or not we can alter it before putting it forward.
I would be interested to see how people feel about this subject, but I also understand that Chris has a very good point that you don't want to create an expectation that whatever the vote comes out to be is what we're going to do, which is why I think if we were to do it, the question would be very important. And so you're not, I'm not sure what the question should be, but I feel like it should be where you're trying to get information, but not a specific solution in the end. Does that make sense? But I think a city hall is not like building an office building, and a lot of it is a symbolic structure, and so asking people in the public how they feel about it and where it should be, and I think is important. So yeah, I would be willing to discuss it again on Wednesday.
I want to just jump in and suggest that there is also a possibility of doing a survey instrument, and we've had some very illuminating surveys, which does enable you to ask a more nuanced series of questions. So
I would like that.
Might give us more information than simply an.
Is that a friendly amendment of some nature, Mayor?
It's
I
just
would
a
be in
suggestion
favor of it.
it's a suggestion about how we might proceed, but I'm, yeah.
Well, maybe we would get somebody like Dr. Manross to give us do a survey, do a community survey around that.
If I might, Mayor, I can count, and I don't think this passes.
Let's vote.
And in the interest, well, I count, it's not going to pass. In the interest of us not creating me recognizing that this may be precipitous as an idea, I would be willing to withdraw the motion if the manager tells me that it might be something we could do to take you up on your idea there that we poll on this question.
I think we would want to have the conversation around what it is you're wanting to survey and what your outcomes are around that. And so if the council would like to do that, I'd like to have another conversation around that and directing us to do that, as opposed to just taking it from this conversation and hiring somebody to do a survey around eWeb in City Hall. I just think we would just need more conversation direction from the council.
I offered it, but I hope we will do that.
Alan.
Well, a survey is only as good as the information that people have, and as Claire said, if it's just a beauty contest, that's an irrelevant survey to me. Without the facts. And we spent good hard money to hire professionals that do this on a daily basis to figure out what it would cost to do the different options. And the one that came out by far the most expensive was the eWeb building. So if we had that kind of information out into the public, then a survey might be appropriate, or a poll might be appropriate. Every time I have talked to someone who suggested that eWeb be the city hall, I bring this point up that we looked at the cost and tell them that it's the most expensive option of all the options that we looked at, and then they change their mind and say, well, maybe I need to look at it again, and they don't pursue it any further. Because cost is a big issue. I mean, that's the reason we're not in a city hall right now, is because it's about $2 million, and eWeb's probably $10 million more. So, because you don't just get to buy part of eWeb, you have to buy the whole thing, and then you have to figure out what to do with it. So it's a different kettle of fish entirely when you can build just the building that you need that meets the needs that you have, and that's why it's so much more expensive. And so a polling or survey without a public education part of it, and Dr. Manross can do that potentially, but if we're going to do that, if there's not enough sentiment on the council to go off of the plan that we're already on, then that's a waste of time as well. And I don't support doing that at this point.
Chris.
I agree. I don't think I would want to support a survey to talk about specific buildings, because they're still at a very nebulous point. But I do think there could be actually some enormous value in having the public's perspective on the preliminary work, the values and the principles that go into deciding what a city hall should be and what it should look like. We've had that conversation many times, and we've kind of settled on a list of what we think are the values that are important for a city hall. But I think we're very rapidly discovering that we can't necessarily afford all of those values, and that we may have to give or take on some of those values. It might be helpful if we were to survey the public in some way, not about a specific building, but say these are some of the things the City Council is thinking about in terms of what a City Hall should be and what a City Hall should represent. And one of those values could be, should it be in downtown or could it be along the river? Should it incorporate the latest in zero footprint carbon neutrality, or could it be a building that was that? Seismic is another question that we've had, which represents a dollar amount. I think you might be able to get some input from the public that might be helpful and provide some guidance in terms of what does the public consider to be the trade-offs on some of those values, because frankly, I support all those values, but I know I can't afford all of those values. So to what degree can I have some at the expense of others, and what does that balance look like, regardless of where we build our city hall? I think that's the kind of guidance that a public could really help us on, because it's not about a specific building, it's about values. And I think the community sense of what our values are is a helpful thing for me. I would want to know what the community's sense of value is so that I can factor that into my thinking. It would still be our decision as to where we go and what we spend and how we do it, but at least we would be guided by the larger sense of what those values are. And I think that could actually be a very helpful thing.
Okay. So I'm going to propose that, we have a vote to take, so maybe we should just do that vote first. And
It says it's downtown, right here.
so we ready for a vote?
Withdraw it.
I said in favor of doing a poll, but we're getting pushback on even asking the public what they think.
Well,
and I think that's
Let's vote.
unfortunate.
I think that's, let's vote, and then I will respond to that. Okay, all in favor? 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it goes down. And I would suggest, the manager and I had a conversation this morning about where we will come back on City Hall, that after the break, we will come back anyway to be looking at City Hall, and that as part of that conversation, there could be a more robust conversation about whether we need more public engagement around this, what that might look like. Does that involve a poll? We can then have that conversation with a little more time to think about what we need, what we would be trying to accomplish, which I think is the important question. So, okay, thank you all. And now Betty, I know Betty has an item of interest, and then I really, really am promising to get to the.
We're ready for items, right?
Yes.
Okay. One thing just came up. Someone called me and said, why can't we have city hall council meetings broadcast on a channel that everybody can get? People who do not have cable cannot listen to city council meetings. And I don't know if that's possible or not, but that's a legitimate question, I think.
We can check into it. I don't know if it is or not.
But it would be good, I think, if everyone had access if they're interested. Well, not everybody has that either.
CNN.
Not everybody is computer savvy even. And then my other thing was, you all saw in the newspaper about the demolition of houses for the Santa Clara Park. And I wonder why we can't save the houses, for now at least, all 3 of them, since we have a housing shortage, we hear. But why couldn't we let the one that's currently occupied, stay there? There are houses in parks all over the country. And as I heard, I was talking to Pat Farr the other day, and he said the county parks have houses in them. It wouldn't hurt to have people living in one house in a park. And it seems to be people are living there now and running a business. And I think it would be good if we could save at least that house.
I know Sarah Maderi responded to your question. I don't remember if that went to all the council or if it just went.
She did, yes, but I know it's been planned for a park, but I still think we can rethink that. It would still be a park, but what's wrong with letting someone live in one house in a park? There might be benefits of it. And it doesn't seem wise to destroy 3 houses when we have a housing shortage. I don't know the condition of the 2 houses that are empty, but they may be empty because they were told they had to move. And maybe they could be rented until the space is needed at least. And I think it would be good to consider letting someone live in the park. Someone lives out at Mount Pisgah, it works out. And I according to Pat, people live in other county parks too.
You know, I just don't know enough details around it. We can, I can ask.
I'm asking for it to be considered.
Yeah, we can sure do that, and we can provide some additional information, and I can talk to our folks about
And
that.
could we, aside from information, could we make a decision if we wanted to?
I'm not quite sure how that process would work, so I'd have to get back to you on that as well.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I am now going to close out the city council meeting and open a meeting with the Urban Renewal Agency and have a conversation, catch up.
Interestingly named.
Riverfront?
Hmm?
Riverfront?
No, it says Riverfront's downtown here, but we've just been told it's not. So I'm interested.
Hello, Mayor and councilors. My name is Michael Kinnison. I'm the Director of Community Development, and I'm here with Glenn Klein. This evening's item is a follow-up from our July 9th work session in which the agency board approved terms related to a disposition and development agreement with Williams and Dame. And at that meeting, we committed to come back to you with specific terms for the affordable housing project. And the board also requested that staff work with Williams and Dame to see if there was an opportunity to expand green space as part of the concept plan. And so we're here to discuss both those issues with you tonight. And the only action that we're requesting is related to the terms for the affordable housing development. So let's start with the affordable housing issue and kind of review the location. If you recall, parcel 10A has been identified for an affordable housing project. Williams and Dame has been committed to providing affordable housing as part of the development from the start of our conversations with them many months ago, and that hasn't changed. But what has evolved as we've moved through negotiations and conversations here with the agency board is the path as to how that project will get done. Williams and Dame is now committed to purchasing parcel 10A and building themselves or in partnership the affordable housing project. The proposed terms for consideration are to sell Lot 10A to Williams and Dame, to build the affordable housing themselves or in partnership with another entity. It sets a purchase price of $1, a minimum number of units of 75, and a level of affordability, which is less than or equal to households at 60% of the average median income. And to get ahead of the question, everybody's going to ask about what that means, and I can never remember those numbers. To give you a sense for that, it's $27,000 for a one-person household, $35,500 approximately for a three-person household, or $41,500 for a five-person household. The remaining terms are consistent with what the board has approved previously. Property would be sold as is. The parcel would be designed and the uses identified in the development and disposition agreement along with a schedule. And the agency would retain a repurchase right if Williams and Dame was unable to deliver on those commitments. So you may be asking why they've decided that they would like to build it. The primary reason for that is really the investor confidence. From their perspective, they're interested in pursuing the affordable housing project in the earlier phases of development for the whole property. They have investors that are going to want to know what they can expect from an affordable housing project. I think all of us here are familiar with what we mean by affordable housing, but not everybody is. And so they're going to want some sense that what gets built is in line with the type and the quality of what else is getting built, as part of the development, and Williams and Dame feels that they can ensure that that's done on an expedited timeline of a high-quality design that blends with the rest of the development. They're also very interested in how the project will work with and support adjacent uses on the site. They would develop a program for the building that includes ground floor uses and make sure those are complementary with what's happening at the steam plant, the adjacent planned apartments or the townhomes around there, and having site control just simply allows them the ability to do those things. I just wanted to point out that we've been having conversations with our local affordable housing providers to be kind of transparent about what's being considered and how this has kind of evolved over time. We met even as recent as this afternoon with folks. We've been listening to what concerns they may have. We're committed to putting together a financing model that limits competition with our local providers. Williams and Dame is open to a partnership in both the construction and the ongoing management, and the current terms would allow for that. And we've continued to, committed to continue having those conversations as a project takes shape over time. Okay, that's the affordable housing item. Let's move on to the green space issue. This is just the concept plan. I wanted to orient everybody here. The EWEB headquarters building. This is the Park Plaza area. These are townhomes, those shapes. This is the affordable housing parcel, 10A. And then, of course, the rest of the park along the riverfront. I'm going to shift our images to where we're going to look. We're going to focus in this area right here. So before I did that, I just wanted to kind of orient you because I think that's the perspective everybody is used to. Let's see. Okay. So just to orient you again, these are the townhomes again. This is the plaza area. This is the 10A, the affordable housing parcel, and that is the steam plant. Now the dash, those little blue dots, that represents the approximation of the park boundary currently, as currently proposed. So after the July 9th work session, we sat down, or Williams and Dame sat down with their architects and considered the concept plan and where there might be some flexibility that could accommodate green space on those parcels that have townhomes proposed. After considering options, they came back to us with a proposal that focused on the interface of parcel 10B and the park, which is this area here. This little symbol, that X, is where the lattice transmission tower pole is, too. And then what I want you to do is just, I'm going to go to another illustration that shows what is being proposed, and this is kind of the area that we're looking at. The proposal would move the townhomes in this area, shift them back away from what was the park boundary here. If you have been out on the site or even noticed on the map, there was this dog leg that comes down with the park boundary and it shifted here and then came back along here. We got some feedback when we've been out with community and even on the tours that felt the interface of those buildings with the park and the lattice pole there was kind of a pinch point. So that's one of the reasons that we focused in this area. The proposed shift would add an additional 5,000 square feet of green space to the park. It would provide for additional separation between the private and the public realms there and buffer the bike path from the townhomes. This location was considered the best opportunities that would minimize the overall impacts to the rest of the concept plan, potentially to how infrastructure would get done and the whole financing of the project, the density that's being proposed. There's some advantages here because we can this road was proposed to continue down, so we can lose some of that right-of-way and not impact access or circulation. The layout of the townhomes, there's a potential to modify them to minimize loss to proposed density. There's some flexibility in this area between these two parcels about how we do the affordable housing project and how we accommodate parking there. So given all those different factors, that's kind of why they proposed this site as having potential minimizing impacts to provide additional green space. And so our plan at this point in time would be to continue working with them to refine that design. Any adjustments to the parcelization or what would eventually go there would come back to you as part of the land use code amendments process, so you could kind of see exactly how that final design would work. And with that, I think I'll end our presentation. Again, we're asking, the only action we're asking for is related to the proposed terms for the affordable housing project, but we're also happy to answer any other questions related to the proposed changes in the concept plan and green space. Thank you.
Okay, any comments, questions? Yeah, Alan, go for it.
What was the appraised value for that property and times 5,000 square feet?
Still in the urban.
So what was the approximate cost of buying that little triangle? Which is what, about a quarter of an acre, or an eighth of an acre, I guess.
Appraised value of.
So, Alan, at $7.95 or $8 a square foot, that would be 5,000 square feet, so that would be about $40,000. But part of that is already right-of-way, so it's not that it's costing us more. We're just, for part of it, we're converting right-of-way into green space. Part of it would be land that Williams and Dame would not be purchasing, but it would be something less than $40,000. That would be different.
They wouldn't have purchased the right-of-way anyway? They would have purchased the right-of-way. Now we would take it.
They would not have been purchasing the right-of-way, so the deal that the board approved last time is they're paying $7.95 a square foot for the actual property that they are purchasing. So the lots that they're purchasing.
Right, and then they were paying, what, half the cost of the
Correct, half the cost of the infrastructure.
So $50,000 less. Whatever the right-of-way cost would be. Plus. Right?
The difference would be $10,000, $20,000, I think, in the overall scheme.
I have Claire and then Betty.
Thank you. So I had a question about the affordable housing project, just to ask another obvious question folks might have, and that's about the idea of selling that piece to whoever the affordable housing developer is for a token amount. And is that typical in terms of how we handle siting for affordable housing projects?
Yes, we typically, when we get a piece of land in our land bank program, we generally offer that up through an RFP process, and we sell that for a very nominal amount. I mean, the idea is that since we don't have enough resource to pay for building these projects, it's how can we help close the gap, and one way we could do that was with the value of the property. So it's consistent with how we would go about doing that.
So that's our contribution, or one of our contributions to getting that project to happen.
Correct. I mean, whatever we can do to lower the cost of that project just ultimately helps and lower the rents that are eventually going to be offered.
Great. Well, I think the logic behind them wanting to be the developer of that housing project makes a lot of sense in terms of giving other investors in the market rate pieces confidence about what that project will mean for the whole site and what it's going to look like. So that is, I'm fine with that. And on the green space piece, do you know off the top of your head what the square footage of the green space was before this proposed adjustment? I know someone said it was the equivalent of a football field.
Do you mean the entire park or which?
Not the riverfront park that's being developed separately, but this green space within the development itself.
Well, the plaza would be, I guess, the primary green space, and that was, maybe 1.1 acres, I think. And then there was also open space proposed underneath the viaduct that Williams and Dame is going to purchase and develop as well.
So I'm just trying to get a sense of proportion on how much additional space the 5,000 square feet provides.
It's about, I don't know what, it's about 0.12 acres or something like that.
12%.
Yeah, so, you know, this was what at least I requested of the developer, and I don't know if it's going to satisfy the folks I had spoken with about wanting to see more green space, but for me, I think it's a good proposal. I appreciate the extra scrutiny given to see if we could pull some more green space out of there if, you know, the developers feel that losing that right-of-way at the very end is not going to, you know, cause a problem for people accessing those homes. You know, I think this is a nice solution that still retains the financial viability of the project and adds some more open green space and improves, as you mentioned, the buffer between the bike path and that space and those townhomes. So I appreciate that work. I think it's good. Thanks.
We would the idea would be to maintain a pedestrian access. You wouldn't completely cut off there.
Right,
but there's really,
vehicle access.
in this design, there's no need to do a vehicular access, and you can gain access to all the other uses there. They feel that works. And, you know, there will be some, there potentially could be some impacts to the number of townhomes but they feel that's manageable, and we don't know exactly what that will be, but they think that they can adjust that and work with that in the rest of the site. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. Yes, the more green space you have, the better for people's sanity as well as for the environment. But so we sell this to them for $1 for subsidized housing. And do they get to keep the profits then from the rent?
Well, it's not really a profit-making operation to do the affordable housing piece, and they're going to partner with another entity, at least to manage the property long term. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's probably not a profit-generating development.
I would think there would be some profit, but so you said it depends on the size of the family, how much rent they pay. And
Correct.
I've always wondered about this. If the children grow up and leave, then do they still get the same rent?
I'm sorry, say that again.
A family, say it's a family of 4, 2 of them are children. That's one possibility. They grow up and move away, which children do eventually. Does the rent go up?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can get you that information.
That's something I've always wondered about.
It's a good question.
And I assume a family could be any assortment of people.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, but I can follow up with you on that.
Thank you. And have we agreed to a tax exemption for Williams and Dane yet?
We haven't had any conversations about what other kinds of support the city might be able to provide on this project. So we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. Do you mean specific to this project?
If somebody has made a commitment already, that they got a tax exemption.
So Betty, are you asking about the MUPTI?
Yes.
No,
That's a tax
there is
exemption,
no
yes.
commitment on the MUPTI. Everybody understands, the developers certainly understand that they will need to apply for the MUPTI and that the council is free to consider that and decide yes or no on that. So there's been absolutely no commitment on a MUPTI.
Thank you.
We have the low-income rental housing property tax exemption program, and so our affordable housing projects can apply for that as well. So this project could be eligible for that too.
Thank you.
I have Alan for a second round. Does anyone need a first round who hasn't had one? Okay, take it away, Alan.
You would think on the rent, it wouldn't be that the rent would go up because that stays controlled. It would be whether or not the people would still be qualified given their income level. They might be forced to not be in the affordable housing category anymore, depending on their income, of course. And affordable housing units mostly work on tax credits as opposed to profit. That's how they pencil out from folks that I worked with on similar kind of projects. While we haven't gone to MUPTI yet, it was a no-brainer dead deal for me if they were going to claim MUPTI with no affiliation at all to the affordable housing project. In this case, they'll own it and have part of it as developer. That at least opens it up for me to be considered the MUPD. Not saying that I think that the MUPD is necessary here, waiting to see that data, but that clears up a big chunk of it for me, which is claiming it just because it's in the boundary when you have nothing to do with it wasn't what I intended to use MUPD for. But so hats off to staff for bringing that back and working a change in the perspective of Williams and Dame in this project that makes it a much better project. I also think it'll be more coherent if they're in control of it. And it'll is there any issue as to timing of when all these parts work and how the affordable housing piece fits in to the overall scheme of things?
Well, they want to have this built in kind of the earlier phases of development so they can show the product, and that will help them with other investors. So that's a critical piece. That's probably the most critical piece in timing for getting this done.
Because the same investors would probably get the tax credits for the affordable housing piece, potentially. And that might be part of the deal.
Well, that could be. There'll probably be different ownership entities throughout the project. So.
For the different buildings. Yep. And different, depending on if they're the townhomes or the commercial buildings.
The hotel
or the
exactly.
Restaurant.
The other apartment complexes.
Yeah, is that their business model, to develop it and sell it?
I think they have several different models that they use, but often they will partner with others to actually do any particular vertical project. So they may have one group of investors that will they'll involve in the northern parcels, like 4th and 5th Street. They may have a different group that they partner with to do the hotel, a different group to do the townhomes. So we can get you more information. I know they do involve different groups of investors, but beyond that, I just don't have the details.
And their previous projects are probably more telling in terms of how they do the business than what's potential in this project.
Right. And that's what I was referring to, is how they've done it in the past.
Yeah, that would be helpful information, I think. On this, I like this idea. I was actually impressed with their creativity about how to do this. Adding the green space for a nominal amount. If it were $250,000, I'd be coughing, but if for maybe $25,000, we can get a little bit more green space. Actually, I think that green space will actually end up looking bigger because of the way it is and its proximity to the other greenway part. So I think it'll actually be an amenity to this. So I'm in favor of that portion as well, if they're willing to go for that part.
Okay, I believe we need a motion on the table for this.
I move to authorize the agency director to sell Lot 10A to WDA to build solely or in partnership with another entity, no fewer than 75 units of affordable housing. The unit shall be affordable to households at below 60% of the area median income.
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that passes. That's excellent. Thank you very much for that work. That helps us move along. And now I am ready to gavel out of the Urban Renewal Agency and back into City Council work session.
Oh, you can start it whenever you're ready.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Nuisance codes.
Yes. So Rochelle Nicholas, Inspection Services Manager for Planning and Development Department, and I'm here with Phil Hubbard, one of our code compliance inspectors. And
you need to speak a little.
We are here to continue the conversation around livability. So we have a quick presentation for you, and then open it up for conversation and discussion and questions.
Okay. We are here today to continue the discussion around livability issues with a focus on the subjects that were raised by council at the last work session, which was almost exactly a year ago. I'm going to start with a quick refresher on the information we presented at the last work session and then provide information regarding the areas of focus, including the city's existing enforcement tools, vacant, abandoned, or dangerous buildings and odor, and other jurisdictions' property maintenance codes. Code compliance serves an important role in the community. Our mission is to preserve and improve the public safety, health, welfare, and the environment. We do this not only by enforcing the regulations that preserve and protect neighborhoods, but more importantly, we provide education on why this is important. Compliance with these codes is vital to protecting health and safety, but also to protect and maintain the appearance and functionality of a neighborhood. This slide provides a small representation of the diverse types of issues the code compliance team enforces. These codes have become increasingly important to maintaining neighborhood livability as Eugene's population grows, densities increase, neighborhoods age, and the types of allowed uses evolve. This map shows the density of complaints by neighborhood, with the upper left blue area being the highest. There are a lower number of complaints in the industrial zones. Additionally, areas that are outside of the urban growth boundary may be slightly lower. The city only enforces zoning and building code violations in the UGB, and the county responds to nuisance complaints, which include things like garbage, storage of junk, debris, and odors. Last year, we received close to 1,800 complaints. The city enforces on a complaint-based system. When a complaint is received, staff work with the responsible parties to achieve voluntary compliance. That means, with the exception of health and safety violations, staff provide opportunity for violations to be corrected before taking enforcement action. When enforcement action is necessary, the city has a number of enforcement tools in place, and how and when they are used is dependent upon the situation. Details on each of these enforcement tools was provided in your council packet. When livability issues are left unresolved, they can have serious detrimental effects on neighborhoods. Over the last 5 years, the city has seen an increase in the number of vacant, abandoned, and dangerous buildings. For our tracking purposes, we categorize these in a number of ways, but each is not exclusive. For example, a structure can be open and vacant as well as dangerous. These maps show the concentration of each of these categories, with the most numerous being in dark orange areas. You can see that dangerous and unsafe structures are dispersed across the city, with an increase in density in the Bethel, Harlow, and Santa Clara neighborhoods. Homes or buildings may become dangerous, vacant, or abandoned for a number of reasons. More recently, staff have received an increasing number of reports of hoarding. Hoarding creates a number of safety and public health concerns, not only for the occupants, but also for emergency service responders and neighboring properties. Working through these situations can take months to years. Another increasing concern that has negatively impacted neighborhood livability is the odor that results during the processing of marijuana. The city has been enforcing marijuana code complaints for many years, but with the legalization of commercial, medical, and recreational marijuana, there has been an increase in the number of complaints. Additionally, likely as a result of legalization and antiquated code language, the city's enforcement efforts have been challenged. We are researching what other communities are doing to address this concern. Generally speaking, the city's nuisance codes, which include odor, have not been updated since the late 1980s. With Eugene's population continuing to grow, increasing density, and the changing character of neighborhoods, the city codes, which were adopted more than 20 years ago, have become deficient in some areas in order to effectively address modern livability issues. In addition to having zoning, nuisance, and dangerous building codes, a number of other cities in Oregon, including Dallas, Medford, Beaverton, Tigard, Salem, Gresham, Portland, and Corvallis, have adopted property maintenance codes. Property maintenance codes often include health and safety issues, but extend to include language that address other livability concerns that are more aesthetic. This slide provides a few examples that may be included in property maintenance codes. Staff have provided council with a couple of possible options. Option 1 includes a two-step process. In the short term, staff can bring back ordinance language that would be similar to other Oregon cities to address negative effects of vacant and dangerous buildings and nuisance odors. And then, over the next 18 or so months, staff can do a comprehensive review of the existing nuisance codes that may address other modern livability issues, which may include adding a property maintenance code. Option 2 would be to take no action. With that, we close our presentation and look forward to council's discussion, questions, and possible direction on next steps.
Great, thank you very much. So who needs to be in the queue? Mike? Chris? Claire? Okay, take it away, Mike. Alan?
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize, but I haven't read all the code pieces of the other cities that were mentioned here. And so I don't know the answer to this, but perhaps there is an easy answer. When a home has been foreclosed on and is abandoned, one of the issues that made foreclosure difficult in previous years and resulted in abandoned homes in many places in the country was establishing who had actual title and actual ownership to a house once the mortgages got built into derivatives and on and on and on. So is there a simple process by which you establish in such a case responsibility for an abandoned property like that?
I don't know if it's a simple process, but we do a lot of research to try to find who is responsible for a property. Oftentimes, some of those properties have stickers on them for property maintenance companies and things like that we can reach out to try to resolve issues. Other times, we have to look for the foreclosure documents and reach out to folks that way. When we do find an open and vacant structure like what you're describing, we can post it for abatement, and if we're unable to reach anybody, then we can try to resolve the issue by having it boarded up.
Okay, thank you.
Chris.
Thank you for the presentation. Very, very informative. And this is an issue that I'm extremely interested in because I think in many respects, one of the ways that a city is responsive to its citizens is in this regard with regard to nuisance. I know that far and away the majority of calls and emails I get from constituents is nuisance complaints. And I think the code is sadly in need of updating. So I really appreciate you bringing this forward. It is way past time to update our code. And I did have a chance to look through some of the other cities, and they can become as prescriptive as Portland, where they practically have everything listed out, and there's some elements of that I liked. But another one like Corvallis, which is maybe a little bit less detailed, but still I think covers the majority of what they're doing. So I like the idea of looking at the other cities and seeing what kind of their best practices are. I think that could be very helpful. Some areas that I would really want to zero in on are areas around health and safety, particularly with regard to maintenance. I realize it's not the job of the city to start compelling aesthetics. You know, your building has to look a certain way. But I do think there's a huge amount of flexibility we have within health and safety, and particularly around maintenance. The blue tarps on the roof and the trash and junk cars in the front lawn, those are not aesthetic as much as they are health and safety. Another area is really with regard to hoarding. I know that there's a number of houses, I have some in my own ward, where it's clear that the person who lives there is a hoarder, and the hoarding has spilled out onto the property itself, and the place looks dangerous. It doesn't just look ugly, it looks dangerous. And I think having some more teeth in our ability to maintain those, I think would be very important to have. So I think all of the things you've got here are really valuable. I think it would be useful to know, is the county as effective as enforcement, that we can really just depend on them to do a lot of this stuff, or do we need to look at what our options might be as a city in terms of picking up some slack if it might be occurring? So it's not just a matter of creating the code to incorporate all of this. As with many of our other conversations, it really also is, how do we ensure that when we decide to enforce, we enforce in a robust way? Because, you know, it's like with your kids, don't do that, don't do that. I'm going to tell you again, don't do that. I'm going to draw a line in the sand, don't do that. And, you know, there's some point where you have to finally say, I'm going to either abate this or I'm going to do something. Otherwise, people will just say, oh, yeah, go ahead, keep telling me not to do that. I think the City of Eugene, as a part of its nuisance enforcement capability, needs to be able to say, we'll give you reasonable amount of due process, but at some point, we're going to enforce, because otherwise this just goes on and on forever. And I think that's really a conversation that I would love to be able to also consider.
Claire.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the examples from other jurisdictions. I support the proposed motion that you suggested for us. I think we should look into that. And I would be interested if there are other places that you believe our code could use some shoring up besides the ones that you highlighted here. I also receive complaints from folks, and typically it's one person's property or what they're doing on their property impacting their own ability to use their property. And one of those involves what the neighbor believes is a home-based business but can't prove it. And so code enforcement is having trouble helping her remedy the situation because the people involved say this is just a hobby, but they've installed industrial fans in their garage and it's impacting the neighbor's use of their own yard. So, you know, it seems to me there are still some places that we might be able to do better and help folks. You know, in this case, it's a neighbor. This person is not comfortable approaching themselves. You know, we would love if we could work these things out between ourselves, but it's not always possible. And I would think that any home-based business or hobby would have to comply with our noise and odor standards. But you're saying that with the advent of legalization of recreational marijuana, you're getting pushback, and that's causing you to have to rethink how our code is currently structured? Is that right?
Just around the marijuana. So we're still enforcing odor on other issues, and so they would have to be in compliant with the code.
Okay. And then I just wanted to share that I've seen, it's been several years now, but I have seen the results of your office's work with a neighbor whose house was out of compliance in terms of standards and safety, and over time, that house is completely different. I walked past it a few weeks ago and I had to do a double take about whether or not it was the same piece of property. And I don't believe you had to resort to enforcement in that case. I think it was all working with that property owner and helping them take the steps they needed to bring their house into compliance. So it is a workable process that does yield results. So thank you.
Alan.
Yeah, I would, first of all, like to note the date for the work session that we had. The poll was actually more than a year ago. We actually had a work session in July. The poll for doing this was months before that. So I think as a council, we need to put guidelines on staff about bringing back items in a more timely manner, maybe say 6 months or something like that, but over almost a year and a half is not what I think is appropriate. And this motion isn't even really action. This is bring something back for us to act on in two ways. The second one being even further out. So given the track record on this issue, I think it will be appropriate to add a time limit on bringing back this issue, say maybe November 1st, since we have to break. But and I'll make that as a friendly amendment when time comes. To me, this issue, when I brought it up initially, and Betty brought it up as well, are two issues. One, abandoned and derelict houses, and then the junk maintenance and aesthetic aspects of it. And they're slightly different, and that's why the motion has two different parts to it. But the derelict and abandoned houses, we haven't modified this code since the 80s, and we just do not have a tool to deal with it. Period. We just don't. And all these other cities have these things. And a lot of them seem to be based off of the Portland one, and then they've copied a lot of the same definitions and things. But having the first part at least go forward with regard to what Corvallis, Portland, Gresham, and Salem have done on the vacant buildings and dangerous buildings is a public safety issue. But then the junk maintenance aesthetic issue is more of a livability issue to me. Some of it can be maintenance or public health and safety. I'm kind of wondering about how far you can push the envelope in terms of the livability requirements of forcing someone to do something with their property where they're just not complying with the norm of the community. And a lot of the ordinances, and I read them all, seem to go, they have somewhat objective standards, but not always. And the stuff about the exterior of the houses is clear. By the way, all the interior stuff that we have, I think is handled almost, all of it was handled by our rental housing code. And when I read these things, everything was in there, was in our rental housing code, so we didn't need to deal with that. But the exterior, what do the windows look like? What do are they boarded up? Is the grass more than 10 inches tall? And are they got junk all over the place? And some of those, there's this fine line I'm trying to get at between public safety and health and welfare and this livability concern. So yes, no question.
The code has to be written in a way that someone can determine whether they are in compliance or out of compliance. So if it can be written and put in the code, even though if it's around livability, then I think we're fine. Where we start to struggle from an enforcement and from an education standpoint is where we as a organization can't even put our arms around how to help people comply because it is too nebulous. So I would say if you can articulate it and we can write it so someone could say, yep, I'm doing that or not, it doesn't necessarily, as you probably saw with another of these codes, have to be a one-to-one with safety.
They don't.
It doesn't have to be.
Right. Yeah, I thought Corvallis pushed it out pretty far and did a good job of capturing that.
Greg.
Thanks, Mayor. Some really rapid fire round questions here. What's the length of time it would take to overhaul the code and to bring it up to date? I know it is probably an arduous process.
Yeah, so I put in there, 18 months. It is a big process. Whether we involve the community or not. We've got city attorney time.
Can we phase it?
We can.
Looking at, dealing with specific problems right off the top, I will give you an anecdotal example. I had a nuisance across the street from me for a number of years that also included a number of public safety violations and criminal violations. And the only way that we were able to deal with that was not through the city code, but for the fact that the owners of the property didn't pay their taxes. So we went to the county. That was the only way we were able to deal with this particular house and what was going on there, including having hundreds of tires that were pulled out of the backyard. You want to talk about hoarding? That was hoarding. Effective, as part of it is how much does effective code enforcement cost us as a city? What would that look like? And then what kind of revenues would we be able to generate from that code enforcement? Because a lot of the people that we would be, quote unquote, going after don't necessarily have the means to, pay fines, let alone take care of their property in a proper manner. So that presents some challenges. With owner affordability. And then two other issues that come to mind here is how vigorous are we with parking violation enforcement in the neighborhoods versus what we have in the downtown core? Because I can tell you, we have a lot of streets, particularly, you pointed out my ward, which is, there's lots of nuisance complaints, where we have cars junked up everywhere. You know, not only on the street, but in yards and everything else. And I haven't seen a parking enforcement officer or any kind of folks coming out to deal with those issues from the city. So I think that we need to, some things that we already have that are up to date need to be acted upon in terms of enforcement, and that parking would be one of them. And sound and noise. Sound and noise, we have a lot of folks that like to party, and to the detriment, and and run their motorcycles or their cars at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it really seems to be a difficult one to get your hands around. I know I'm out of time on this one, but those are my questions.
Do you need a second round?
Possibly. Okay. Put me down just in case.
Emily.
Thank you. The odor complaints with marijuana, it says processing. Is that drying? What exactly is the complaint?
So the act of from taking the plant, I don't know, from taking the plant to the usable, the drying process. So
drying. Well, there's a lot of things you can do with marijuana. So processing, does it mean taking it down to a distillate, or are you just drying it to, do whatever with? I think it's probably the smell while it's drying, but I just would like, clarification if there's going to get to be an ordinance and
I'm
stuff.
like you, I don't know exactly at what stage of the process it begins to smell worse than others. I just know when we get the complaints and what we try to do with that person who happens to be growing it to try to resolve an issue.
What's happened in the last year? Because I pulled out what we got last year, and we had a lot, not all of the same codes from other cities. And I thought that we were asking to find out what kind of codes we could make or change to deal with our problems. But I feel like I'm getting the same answer I did last year.
Part of, I think, what's happened, and this will be a little bit of response to Alan. Rochelle, as you know, this nuisance code has been bumped numbers of times over the last 12 months. And so for any numbers of reasons, oftentimes for council-initiated projects and work sessions, which have all been extremely valuable also. And so I think what we have been is waiting to get to this point of saying, we do recommend moving forward on the things that they've talked about, and would have liked also to have been here 9 months ago, 6 months ago, but just by circumstances that has nothing to do with our enforcement staff, are at this point at this moment. And so we're actually sort of at, it would have been nice if were at this point 6 or 9 months ago, and then we would have been working in the interim since then. So we've been waiting to come and get more specific council direction on moving forward on some things.
So what is specific council direction? Because I thought asking to look at ordinance language was pretty specific, and now we're going to ask that again. So I'm just wondering why we have this work session today, because it feels like we're just asking you to do what we asked you to do last time, and we got so many topics.
Yeah, so I can.
So I can share last work session, we ended up getting condensed to about 20-minute work session. And at that time, there was just a lot of conversation about a lot of different topics. And we left that work session with the direction that you wanted to come back and have more conversation about it. So that's...
Thanks. I forgot how abbreviated that session was. And so, okay, now it's starting to make sense. We tried to come back. We tried to come back. Okay, go forward quickly.
Right. Hey, Betty.
By now, I would hope that we would have some sample motions, some sample actions that we could take. I was hoping for that months ago, but I think and now we're just saying, come back with something, and I think we said that a long time ago. I think the most urgent thing is the abandoned houses. I would hope that we could do something about that very soon, that if the house is abandoned, we should be able to get enough money out of the land to pay for enforcement, I would think, if it's a case where people have gone away and left the house. And I think that is urgent because it creates it's not just a livability thing, it's a fire hazard. and especially in the summertime. And I kept saying for a long time, let's do something before summer. Now we're at the summertime, and things are worse, fire hazards worse in the summertime when everything is dry. So I hope that we can at least do something about that could come before other things. And I think there are a lot more things. I was in Little Rock recently, 3 of us were in Little Rock recently, and the mayor of Little Rock said that they are doing a lot to help people do something to their houses, bring them up to standards. And the city is helping remodel and paint and put a roof on and so forth with houses that are in danger of falling apart. So that's a different thing for people that just walk away from a house, people who can't afford to keep it up. I think we should find out if we can use money. They're using grant money, he said, and probably CDBG money could probably be used for that sort of thing too. But to help the people who can't make their houses livable and attractive, or at least not too unattractive. But so it's 2 different things. The ones that are abandoned, I think that is urgent, and they're all over town. They aren't just in one part of town. Sometimes there's a very expensive house that has been, for some reason, has been left, and it becomes a hazard if no one is there. So I hope we can get some kind of timeline now instead of just saying, come back sometime. Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, so thank you. I think this was really smart to go ahead and have an option, an A where we're targeting the things that we already kind of know what we want to do, and then coming back after taking a good look at what we need to do in a Part B. You said the whole process you thought would take about 18 months. What do you think about the first step? Is there a possibility to get it back in fall, or?
I think we can get it back in 3 months.
Okay. That was it.
Catherine.
I'll just say, before you go on your break in the winter time, we can have that back and try to do it sooner in the fall than later in the fall as well. And partly I say that is we've been working on the calendar in the fall. It's filling up pretty quickly with things that are already on your agenda. So I just want to figure out how we can fit this in as well.
Right. Okay, I have 3 councils for second round. Greg, then Alan, then Mike.
Well, I think that's in line with what I said earlier too, is that I'm really kind of thinking that, if we do a phased approach, take as Betty suggested, take vacant buildings, abandoned buildings, dangerous buildings first, and then kind of work our way through the code and, go into specifics in terms of those parts of the code that are really more antiquated than others and have more urgency in terms of the effect and how we can actually, do that. I think would be probably not telling you how to do your work, but, that would be a strategy, I think, that would give us some progress in terms of, renovating the code and, and dealing with some of these issues as well. And then I also like the idea of where we can using, federal funds or state monies that we can get to assist those people who are on the edges and the fringes and don't have the resources necessarily to keep up properties. There's a lot of people, senior citizens, people with disabilities, that are living in properties that they just don't have the resources or the ability to keep up on a regular basis. So if we could help first before we, go into draconian ways of enforcement, I think would be a more humane approach to this. But there are some people who just, for lack of a better metaphor, just want to stick their finger up to their neighbors and say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And in that case, I think we need to be able to put the enforcement hammer down and, go through with, saying, hey, the city is serious. We're gonna do something about this, and you're either going to deal with your issues or you're going to have to pay. And then we will deal with your issues. You deal with them or we deal with them.
We apply that to other places.
Yeah. Hey, Alan.
Yeah, one of the things we don't want to do is have people do this improvements and then bump their taxes up. I often thought that this is a prime spot for a residential MUPD, where we give people a tax abatement for the improvements they made, make sure their tax assessment doesn't go up accordingly if they do that. But that'd be a broader conversation. But it could apply here in a very limited sense, and that might be a good trial balloon for it. The important part to me about this is the compliance mechanism and getting some teeth into this stuff, because we have no tools and no ability to do anything. And so what other folks have done, Corvallis and Gresham and Salem and Portland, they have those kind of teeth with the appropriate kind of process behind them, which I think is great. When we discussed the livability issues before, we got some other information about college towns, in particular Madison being one of them, that had really good information and good ideas that we talked about that were embedded in those codes, especially with revolving around students and the nuisances that they create, which are a little different than some places around the town. So there's some really good ideas in there that maybe we could bring those and apply them here. My earlier comment about adding a timeline was about part one, by the way. It wasn't about the whole thing. I understand the second part, but I don't understand why the second part would take 18 months to come back. That doesn't seem like an appropriate time frame from today. Maybe if we're going to do it before winter break, maybe in the first part of the next year, when we come back, we could get the livability portions of the nuisance issues. Is that doable, you think? I don't know, what were you referring to when you said 18 months?
Oh, that's just what I was kind of thinking as far as timeline.
I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, I think we need to crack open and see to what extent some livability issues some clear ones maybe actually be able to be pulled through as part of the phase one. I think when you talk about public outreach, the livability issues have more of a tendency of seeking some public input because they are more nebulous. They're not a safety issue or, vacant building type thing, not as cut and dry. So I'm guessing the 18 months has some of that wrapped into it.
Yeah, if you're going to do public outreach, please come to my ward. You'll get a resounding heck yes, let's do this, let's do it fast. Hopefully we can do that sooner than later. The last point was about hoarding. Hoarding's pretty complicated because it often involves mental illness associated with it. And I know that can be very complicated when it comes down to just doing court action or civic action to make something happen. There was a guy in our neighborhood who was a hoarder, and his house was just filled to the brim. And when he died, after not doing anything about his house forever, when he died, his sister took it over, and she basically just bulldozed the house and started over because it was so bad. So it's a very complicated issue, and I think we need to treat that with the respect of understanding that there's a mental illness part of that in there as well.
What I was going to say is what I think we could really work on is make the part two of the motion a 12-month project, which would be prior to your next summer break. And what we can do is when we come back with phase one, which would be before your winter break, we can also update that and see if that's still on track based on if there's additional work that we didn't anticipate that needed to be done. And so we can try to shorten that into that 12-month window rather than 18. Okay.
That's reasonable, but not fast enough.
Yes, true.
Okay, that's great. Do we want to put a motion on to
Okay.
vote?
I move to direct the city manager to, 1, bring back ordinance language similar to the cities of Corvallis, Portland, Gresham, and Salem to address negative effects on neighborhoods caused by vacant buildings, dangerous conditions caused by hoarding, and nuisance orders related to the processing of marijuana in residential zones. And 2, conduct a comprehensive review of the existing nuisance code for additional revisions that may address other modern livability issues, which may include adding a property maintenance code to the cities of Corvallis, Portland, Gresham, and Salem.
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's great. That passes. So thank you very much for this work. I'm glad we finally got to it. And we are adjourned until 7:30.